So hello, welcome everyone. I, on behalf of Team Road, welcome you here in this auspicious evening. Road is an initiative formed in the year 2006 by a group of like-minded architects to introduce young creative minds to the new possibilities, unknown avenues, and innovative interpretations of spaces. This is our sincere effort to refresh design awareness, sustainable ideas, liveliness of modernity, as well as the undiminishing light of conservative thought. Road aspires to instill hope and believes these interactions inspire and enlighten students and professionals. I welcome you here for the Vishnu Joshi Memorial Lecture 2024. Late Vishnu Diwakar Joshi, Papaji, as we fondly remember him, was born on 14th February 1927. He graduated from College of Engineering Pune in 1948. He later went to Cambridge, England for post-graduation in structural engineering. After working in England for a few years, he joined master architect Joseph Valentine's studio in Delhi, where he worked on landmark projects like IIC Delhi Auditorium, India Habitat Center. At the peak of his career with Stein, in 1973, he thought of setting up a workshop for his passion of ferrocement in paint near Mumbai under the name of Sarang Ferrocrete and seahorse as symbol. Ferrocement as construction technique was made popular in India by Joshi Sir. He is a pioneer of ferrocement in India. After his demise in 2011, it was decided that in memory of this visionary structural engineer, every year on Valentine's Day, which happens to be his birthday, D Joshi Memorial Lecture will be held. So here we are today for this year's lecture. We have today with us Sankalpa as today's speaker. Sankalpa is formally trained as an architect and urban designer. He has been teaching at the Faculty of Architecture, CEPT University, Ahmedabad, India, since July 2008. However, he would wish to call himself a fellow learner with his students and an architect with a deep interest in the expression of space as an outcome of material and structure. He is interested in exploring the engagement of the body to the structural forces as a tool to experience architecture. His studio pedagogy approaches making the same way a dancer would approach dance by actively and temporarily modifying space through changing body postures. He is also a co-founder of Thumb Impressions, a collaborative practice involved in the design and detailing with earth, bamboo, timber, and steel. He is a founding member of the India Bamboo Forum, chaired by Honorable Member of Parliament, Sri Suresh Prabhu, and a lifetime member of the Bamboo Society of India. He is also an advisor to Karigar Shala, an organization working for artisanal skill building for youth interested in non-formal education. I will now please request Sankalpa to take on the stage.
Being present in this wonderful evening. I'm especially very happy and surprised that today I have a special person, Dr. Malay Patel, a client. He's a famous vascular surgeon who flew all from Ahmedabad to listen to this lecture. I'm extremely grateful, sir. I don't think there's a better way to acknowledge that. I acknowledge the whole road team that they invited me. Thank you, Professor Joshi, Prasanna, Nimesh, and everyone else who organized this. There are two parts to this lecture. The first part would be where I would be reading, and the second part would be where I would be showing you the work. There is a reason for it. So architects should not present their work in a format that glorifies them. It can be presented as a description of the attempt or what has been done. Critics and researchers' job is to analyze and present their findings. In a forum of like, a salesperson's speech is the least you'd expect from me. Therefore, my job here is to take you on a journey of the intellectual concerns we deal with today in academics and practice. My talk today is built into two parts. The first part deals with the relationship between space, type, and artifact. It's an academic in me trying to grapple with the practice of architecture in the university and outside. The second part is the work we are doing, where you may find some concerns addressed and some yet to be resolved. I shall further put forth an attempt to build the relationship between the material structure and type for the architectural artifact. The presentation is more about provocation and questions instead of solutions. The search for the origin of architecture becomes an important enlightenment project for the architects. The struggle to consider architecture as a discipline emerged in the 18th century with the European Enlightenment. Since we consume literature of the writings of the century, we cannot but bring back the sufferings of those architects to our own land in India and add to our own. Thus, architecture started suffering from the amnesia of being a discipline right at the time when other disciplines like science, history, mathematics, etc. were all being formed. In fact, we have a mockery of architecture by not making it clear. So it was in that time when all the disciplines were asked, or all of these were asked about why is it called a discipline. So whether it is science, whether it is mathematics, all of them were struggling to define it. Later on I'll tell you what constitutes a discipline. Many disciplines were combined pre-Enlightenment and only later separated out. Later, with further clarity in methodology between science and humanities in the second half of the 19th century, an inevitable separation strengthened the respective field. This act of strengthening also established a rigid boundary where the crossover of knowledge discouraged holistically comprehending the phenomena related to two disciplines. As Professor Pitambar points out, architecture can become a discipline if it has a question that is particular to it. It has a methodology particular to it and a professional body like IIA or COA, etc. So there are these three factors that constitute any discipline. In our case, the question is contested all the time, except the fact that space making as a question is too unclear. We keep borrowing methodology from all the possible disciplines of science and social science, but we do have a professional body, so to say. Structure engineering is different from architecture because the questions they raise are different. Structure engineering deals with analyzing the behavior of a structural system and suggesting form, sizes, and details for the material to ensure the stability of the overall building. Architecture, however, struggles to offer a clear, acceptable definition. There isn't a sufficient clarity over what architecture is supposed to do or what one should consider architecture or non-architecture. Are all buildings a work of architecture? Various stakeholders have made endless statements about architecture, but each is more poetic or overtly technical and either moves towards engineering or remains qualitatively largely unaddressed. For example, if architects design spaces, architects must explain the quality of that space to the audience in terms of concepts that are legible to understand. Often words like beyond, genus loci, or celebrate, far from explaining qualities, creates confusion. None of the definition of architecture convincingly positions it epistemologically other than the study of type or the development of a parametric architecture that demands a piece of tangible information and instruction to model a work of architecture. Though the possibility to otherwise allow interpretation makes architecture more plural, it is also elusive and often esoteric. This calls for relooking at some prevalent definition amongst professionals, academic perceptions of architecture, or formal definition in dictionaries or other literature. And for example, in Webster defines architecture in 4 ways, from the art and science of building to the architecture styles. It covers a large spectrum without discussing many other aspects of architecture like the user itself. Suppose architecture is concerned with mediation between art and science. In that case, the subjective interpretation of art or looking at architecture from the lens of art makes an asymmetrical case of connecting to the art tradition. Similarly, the scientific basis of architecture is only limited to the constructional aspects of architecture, which I mean engineering as well. In a way, the definition points out that all other discussions on architecture other than construction are not science. Such definition also lead to confusion amongst various stakeholders as one seeks clarity over the boundary of a discipline. Bianco, 1970, attempts to find an operational definition of architecture. The survey conducted on practicing architect students and academics shows the different definition of architecture. Regardless of gender, practitioners defined architecture as an art and applied science that holistically enhances the environment. The harmonious manifestation of a visually appealing and practical space serves the user's well-being. Architecture students offered 2 operational definitions of architecture. One was phenomenological and the other was historical traditional, with female answers dominating. While the latter defined architecture in terms of sensory experience, the former does so in terms of proportions. Architecture is the art of creating the most comfortable, sensory sensitive area for habitation to meet each individual's needs and aspirations. According to academics, architecture develops through conversation between human activities and the environment to create a functional space suitable for human needs. Therefore, there is no common agreement about architecture besides the presence of a client and user's experience. Let's also look at some key architectural figures in India and their remarks on definition of architecture. Please forgive me, there are crucial names here. India's 2 most prominent architects, late Charles Correa and late architect Professor Balkrishna Joshi, have their take on architecture. Correa, certainly architecture is concerned with much more than just its physical attributes. It is a many-layered thing. Beneath and beyond the strata of function and structure, material and texture lie the deepest and most compulsive layer. Joshi, a marriage between the personal creative urge and fulfilling the unspoken dreams of the client is architecture. Korea's take, rooted in India's material and climatic context, points towards a layer that underlies beyond the material aspects of a building, as if architecture is some hidden layer that is the source of its materialization and not the other way around. In fact, the materialization of architecture for him is merely a means to clearly reach beyond what remains unexplained. It is hardly understandable other than in its poetic sense. Joshi points towards the client's dream as a necessary condition to be shaped by the creative ability of the architect. Suppose architecture is about the demand of the client creatively fulfilled by the architect. In that case, the verifiability that the architecture ought to suggest as a pattern or rule that will satisfy all clients with similar needs remains unanswered. Using the term creatively, the epistemological question is sidetracked for a more client satisfaction argument while not disclosing what entails architectural creativity. In both the explanation by Correa and Joshi, the epistemological basis of architecture is far from clear. The former remains at a poetic imaginary level, whereas the latter is too generic and obvious. Both definitions are difficult to break down into methods of approach and validity. So even if you are able to understand that what is that hidden layer, you don't know what that hidden layer is, then how do you understand the method of design, or how will you break up into parts so that you are able to design it? Let's also revisit the three crucial influences on architecture in the last 100 years in India, namely modernism, postmodernism, and critical regionalism. Modernism, which eschewed decoration in favor of minimalism, emerged as the 20th century's most significant new architectural and design aesthetics. It was linked to an analytical approach to structure, purely rational use of material, structural innovation, and the omission of adornment. In opposition to modernist architecture's austerity, formality, and uniformity, postmodernism emerged in the 1960s to encourage the restoration of some symbols that can communicate cultural association through architecture. It responded to monotony and homogeneity by valuing differences and attempting to develop structures sympathetic to their context. Frampton made a case for critical regionalism in his essay, where he emphasized architecture's topography, context, climate, light, tectonics, and tactile quality as a departure from postmodernism. His essay on critical regionalism elaborates on several more philosophical ideas to counter architecture universalization. But knowledge is supposed to be universal in some way. I mean, a physics experiment that you conduct here is true everywhere else. So in that sense, I am saying that the knowledge is supposed to be universal. But knowledge is supposed to be universal in some way. We see each successive influence struggling with the formal aspect of architecture and its expression in response to the promise of their former. From modernism as a proponent of austerity, formality, and homogeneity, the critical regionalism yet again reaches towards local distinctiveness and responsibility of architecture to recognize context other than abstract ideas of geometry or austerity of construction expressed through rejection of surface application. The predominant idea in all three remain devoid of the human aspects of inhabitation, as if the primary purpose of architecture is to make an artifact that needs to be inhabited instead of the other way around. Can we conclude that inhabitation should interest architects in a more scientific manner? Each of the three influences emerged from specific contexts at a particular time in history. Industrialization, for example, pushed for urban migration. The beginning of a nuclear family in urban centers created an immense gap for modernism to explore its ideas. Postmodernism pointed towards nostalgia of some kind in incorporating some of the past elements, often contradicting modernism's anticipated rational and Puritan logic. Critical regionalism dominantly brought context to argue for differentiation. By this time, critical regionalism emerged in the world, and most specifically in India. The market supply chain of industrial material, scientific research put into RCC steel and other industrial materials, and availability of skill sets had radically transformed the architecture by the time it emerges in India. Critical regionalism. Regionalism materially was operating in a context dominated by the knowledge and industrial efforts of modernism. At this juncture, it is necessary to acknowledge that means and process of construction are intrinsically related to the type of choices made during different times. The task of architecture cannot be separated from the construction process, as the juice of architecture will lie in ways and means towards accessing construction. Can we conclude that ability to organize material in space that sets a boundary between inside and outside is what should interest architects? For architecture to communicate its differences compared to other disciplines, a separation of architecture as an art and science of building may remain peripheral towards questions of inhabitation from individual to the collective. In this regard, the emerging patterns out of choices made by people and their urge to modify them is the task of architecture. This is even more important as the shift from individual houses to the functional architecture of apartments intensely poses the question of identifying subtle changes made by people within a fixed type, dominantly fixed to the marked logic. Can we conclude that classification of architecture as type and its transformation is what should continue to interest architects? Anthony Vidler quote, type, of course, in its literal original meaning from the Greek, meant impressions or figure from the verb to beat. It was applied to the impressions of coins, and after Gutenberg and Valentine to the piece of wood or metal used in printing the characters of the alphabet. Widler points out that type is a source of architecture regeneration, and that you can see in many works like Argan and Rossi. The type has a disposition. As per Professor Pitambar, type is a post facto attempt. But our interest that there is something that remains without any change is why there is an interest in type. This certainly is not the case in Indian situation. In India, we have yet to reach a point where the discussion of the past remains of much attention unless it comes within the conservation discourse. We are not discussing questions of memory or identity significantly, and not at all the role of type socially, where historical precincts have a significant role to play other than problems of traffic jams. In our case, we need to study why some survive and rest are ignored by the community and society to be demolished. Now the part that I would be going, it would start becoming a little more complicated, so please forgive me again. What is peculiar to Indian example is a shift from old to the new with the changing of materials. The new is new in the sense that it is free from any reference to the past except the plot size. The plot amalgamation has further changed the grain size. The post-liberalization saw a rise in the monster scale of building. In fact, there is no difference between airports and malls in terms of scale. In fact, now airports are being on the line of malls. The human scales have completely been altered, and grains have been modified to cater to new housing densities and commerce. We have not matured enough in the way transformation has happened in the grain size. It had not happened since last 500 or 1000 years what it has happened today in last 20 years. So we are in a very remarkable time from the perspective of history. However, the conservation discourse is picking up and has limited but positive future. My contention of treating it as limited is because it primarily concerns buildings of the past and their value, and not actively of the culture that comes from relationship between people to the landscape. For example, do you remember any historical buildings of great significance in the floodplains of Bihar? I'm just giving an example. Those plains did not primarily entertain buildings of its past that were long-lasting or durable, because you are on a floodplain, it's very difficult. Durable buildings emerged quite late with a gradual understanding of settling on higher landform limited in the plains, or modifying the landform to deal with water to create highlands for settlements. The flooding provided very limited room for physical permanence and constraint, and resources were of constraints in those floodplains. The floodplains demand a recognition of the continuous cycles of land-water relationship instead of treating it as a physical artifact. The landscape itself is an artifact that actively shapes the inhabitant's life. The cultural landscape thus emerges. The recent attempt to look at Majoli in Assam is an exception, a cultural landscape to be preserved as a heritage. An artifact like a carefully worked out bamboo chopal, which is like you can call it a bamboo gazebo, emerges as a public place, though gendered, to celebrate the stature of the persons owning it. The type, or for example house type, is a social institution emerging through a shared process of relationships that makes a house similar to another, or despite differences in articulation or other elements and how they are handled, the formal relationship of its parts remains the same and continues to do so. So, therefore, we may say that the type has emerged. There were attempts in the past to create what we may loosely call type, comes from the combinative paradigm of Durand. I mean, if you have ever come across plan configurations and typical, it was systematization of architecture plans by Durand, and it made some sense in the way in which, in the context in which he was operating. Though his work is both an abstraction to combined forms, but also one of the early ideas of generative architecture. His theory causes significant discomfort among the architects because it is perceived to take away the so-called creative ability of architects and put it in a set of rules of combination. There were these houses, or there were these plan forms that you could combine to create different other forms, and once you start doing it, suddenly you find that what is now left for architects to do. Repetition is universal. Combining shapes is universal. It's not something uncommon that two different shapes combine using a recurring logic in nature. In Durand's case, instead of discomfort, creativity must be seen as a basis for making combinations possible, diversity out of a given inventory. The theory of type also suffers from the search of a priori, from which all other types emerge. That is, it works with deductive logic, which means from general ideas to specific conclusions. Widler prioritizes nature over architecture as a lesson. The fact that scholars worldwide have also obsessively researched the priori or the source. I mean, source is something that fascinates many. Let me now explain that my viewpoint on the source is a problem if it has a point, if it has a point or a specific, like a primitive hut from which all architecture emerges. So there are some group of people who say that the architecture emerges from the primitive hut. A priori is a reductionist view of the world. It is beneficial if it is thoughtfully employed. Let's take the example of a river. Would you consider the river source as water and the principal flow of water from high to low potential, or glacial as a river source? So what is the source? What is the source of a river? Is it the water coming from high potential to low potential, or it is the glacial as a source? Let's assume a Himalayan case. This may be very different from what people have to believe. For example, as you go closer to the glacier, you may get more pure water, unlike the plains. In this case, the degree of purity the people believe decides the source. And so people are believing, it's the cultural phenomena that decides that. That doesn't mean that the source of the river is the glacial, because there are multiple places from where water is falling and it is coming from high potential to low potential and making the river. So how can there be one source of the river? The assumption that there is a process that is the source instead of a physical place is better explanation if we all want to get into the priori logic. It is the relative height, the high and the low potential with water, that is the source and not the physical place. So long as we stick to this idea, the concept of type could be very useful in architecture. How are types represented? Now usually they are represented through diagrams similar to plan, section and axonometry. I am saying they are represented as diagrams, so they are not plans. Okay, they are thought like the fact that one chooses movement and what regulates movement differentiates from the other. In case if you want to take, let's say, a courtyard house or a house which has a central staircase, etc. The relationship between type and structure, however, is an interesting way. Now I am shifting from that to the relationship between type and structure. As we know, type is an idea and so is structure. One which emerges in a way society manifests its relationship, but be it social, cultural, economic or physical, whereas structure is constant and exists as universal truths. There is a need to look at type in architectural space because unlike the universal constancies that comes with structure, type is a derivative of how society functions and builds various relationships at play. Human beings produce type in the way they operate in a society. The variation of type, therefore, is understood as well as the constancies of the structure. Therefore, though structure and type have spatial implications, they are very different ideas that make the artifact. Space is in type and type is in space. The building is in type and the type is in building. Space is in the articulation of material, and the articulation of space is in the material. Structures precedes space, or at least it is simultaneous. Spaces lies at the intersection between the institution of human beings and the physical realities of the world. Here, hence, the building that is a work of architecture is an artifact, and technology as its enabler. The artifact that is subject is derived from the spatial structure or type, and simultaneously has a structural basis realized by material. Here I mean brick, concrete, steel, timber, etc. Therefore, the relationship between space, type, and artifact is essentially a structural one. Nevertheless, the relationship between structure and space is mediated by material, for which the technology is enabler. The type is in building, and the building is in type. The type materializes through the building, otherwise it's an abstract idea. Type and structure show a similar idea where both need a material layer to realize. In my view, space is everywhere to be occupied. Space is given. Even Kant has said it's a priori. Humans occupy the space surrounded by the envelopes made out of material, whereas material themselves occupy the space to make the envelope. So it is not only that you get a space because of material, but the material is itself occupying space. That's why you are getting the other space. So the one space, that is the residue, and the other space which the material occupies. It is the material and the elements of building that make space liminal. If we now look at what an abstract idea like type and structure has done in the field of architecture, it has facilitated architecture to move from the field to the classroom. Because earlier what was happening is that you were learning architecture from the master builder, they were designing, they were building, they were doing, everything was together. Now you cannot do the same 1:1 thing in classroom. So there was a compulsion for architects or architecture discipline to invent some ways to get into the classroom, or in other ways architecture was asked, how do you get into a university model? It isn't therefore surprising to say that type is so, anyway, let me say again, if we now look at what an abstract idea like type and structure has done in the field of architecture, it has facilitated architecture to move from field to the classroom. It isn't therefore surprising to say the type of structural system. Similarly, to say house type means to recognize that a recognizable relationship exists, which is evident when compared, but only makes it further discursive. Structural concepts as essential underlying principles based on which materials are dispersed in specific configurations are the most tangible anchor for architects to derive space. Structure precedes, shapes, and modifies the experience of space. Space, as we understand in architecture, is merely the residue of what structure provides. The space and the process of making that space, or the mastery of space making that produces an artifact, is an indistinguishable entity where form emerges from the relationship between construction, structure, and space. We may analyze the building using a lens of structure or construction, but in reality it exists indistinguishable. So from type and structure, I am moving to construction and space and all those relationships I am trying to build for you. More clearly, let me repeat again. The distinction between type and structure is the fact that type is a cultural product, whereas structure is universal. Structure exists irrespective of culture. Now you may say that the culture invented structure. Now that's a very different discussion to get into it. The use of structural system may be a cultural product, but not the presence of structural system or its principles. It exists. Type and structures are essentially the same, that is, they are reduced to, in some sense, to a level that is almost devoid of material, to a pure relationships. It has a promise to take the material, but that is not spelled. The material is chosen based on the material properties, unless there are two materials of competing properties, that the choice of choosing one over the other emerges. When it was pushed into university model. Devoid of the learning on site, it has to build pedagogy and knowledge that could be transferred indirectly or abstractly through lectures and practical works. Compared to its furniture or product design counterparts, architecture was never prepared to be part of the mainstream model. It could only be scaled, unlike furniture and product design. This also called for introducing and developing scaled knowledge of architecture education. It had to borrow tools and technology from other re-established disciplines. For architecture to be a discipline, it needed questions related to its area, a methodology that could help inquire about it, and a professional body, as I said. As per Professor Pitambar, if architecture chooses to be purposeless, it is good to enjoy its space in drawings, not in realization. In fact, he said that so long as architecture is a drawing, it's an art. When you build it, it becomes architecture. Imagine a volume with a small void. Darkness helps to reveal only a partial aspects of the volume. The volume is lit by light in the way light enters it to displace the darkness. In any state, the materials are constantly organizing themselves to arrive at a stable position, a position that is at a lower potential. I'm touching the last part. This position is its disposition. It is but to arrive at that state. The material at the same time also has its life cycle. A structural brick wall remains stable until the material gives up owing to its decay. An empty plot of land in the day and the same in the dark are different, not because there is an awareness of the plot by standing in or around it, but because darkness produces sameness in and around. The darkness does not differentiate between any plot built or unbuilt. Darkness homogenizes the plot as an undifferentiated entity. Volume is merely a projection of imagination realized by the material, or that of manifestation that already existed in an unmanifested state. A building is an artifact when the maker invests in the care and attention to the detail of a building, irrespective of the economy of the resource. It emerges from the human ability to work with a given resource, extending and enhancing the characteristics of that resource expressed in the choice, design, and execution of the details. The artifact, in this case a building, referred to as architecture, is a coherent representation of details expressed in material and enabled by technology. The artifact has a volume and mass. It has a space inside, outside, around, and within. It is the light that eventually reveals the architecture, but it's the technology that realizes it. Thank you. So this completes my first part. So I think I am on time. It's 6:44. So you can take a break, and or how do we proceed now? Yeah, we can take a 10 minutes break, and then I'll sort of show work where I have to speak less. Show you some of the work in practice that Thumb Impressions is doing. There are 4 partners to this organization. Milind, Nikhil, Manu, and myself, 4 of us started this office around 11 years back. And these are some of the works which I am trying to show you. And in the process, I'll explain you some primary concerns. Whether it is our furniture work or architecture work or execution work, what is common is the relationship between structure to construction to program. In this case, when it is furniture, it becomes function ergonomics, and here it becomes material optimization. What we understand is that a good architecture emerges when you cannot separate structure, program, and construction relationship. They are indistinguishable. I mean, it's an ideal, not that all the time it's possible to meet it, and that's why I separated the text part from this part, so that you're not colored by my overclaims. So these are some of the work that our furniture wing is doing. We generally do work where we are using solid wood timber, and then we are mixing it with brass and steel. We have a small workshop where we design and then build it. Our clients are generally architects, but sometimes we also get independent commissions. So as I said, that we are constantly trying to explore the relationship between construction, structure and material. So if you look at in the way steel is handled, steel is supposed to give us far elegance than when we use timber. So the mixing of the steel is purposefully done to make it lighter, and obviously it needs to ergonomically work. Okay. These are some of the other examples of it. If you can look, we do get into mechanical details wherever it is necessary. This is a swing that has become suddenly quite viral across the world now. We had more than 1 million views of it, and we have got now so much interest across the globe to sort of get some of these things. But basically, again, it's a combination of timber and steel. So steel is a very good material to combine with natural material, because as you know that it's an isotropic material, and an isotropic materials works very good in all the direction, and any natural material generally is not as good isotropic as what we get steel. As you move from steel to timber to bamboo, it becomes highly anisotropic. So some of the work that we have been doing in furniture, there's quite a famous chair. I mean, it is becoming quite so popular that I don't know, I mean, 200, 300 versions of this we have been trying to produce. It's basically a work desk where this back part rotates. So it sort of, so this is what it's called a beak chair. So this part rotates, and it really creates a lot of comfort. It's generally used for both dining but as well as for study purpose. There is another kind of exploration that we do where we are pushing the limits of the material, where we are trying to make it in cantilever in a reverse way. Generally you'll find in this way. So again, you can see a gap between when you sit. You can see these gaps and how these angles are worked out for ergonomics. So these are some of the works that we have been doing. Again, swings, brass sort of worked out, very good mechanical joints. You can shift sides from one to the other. This is again other very popular chair. If you look at it, the way it sort of connects it, you can also imagine why not the other way around. Okay, so that's up to you to think about it, that this is more correct than the other way around. So some of the works that we have been doing in sort of comfort zones. I don't know what has happened, but okay, this is for Tanera showroom in Delhi, for where we sort of gave some of the furnitures in the showroom. Dharmesh Bhai was its interior designer. Some of the way we produce drawing in the office for furniture is something like this. And this is a workshop where there are templates. Our artisans still sit on the floor and then work out. Our other wing, so the first wing was furniture. The second wing is execution wing. It's called Thumb Impressions Build. We do generally construction in earth and lime and bamboo and all. Anything which mainstream contractors will not do. So that's what the Thumb Impressions Build wing does. So this is all lime plaster of different versions that has been worked out. There are some precast works that has been done. This is some rammed earth over stone work. It's in Jaipur that has been worked out. This is poured earth work which we did for Studio Bus Ride. It's in Goa. Okay. These are poured earth. They wanted color. So we do lime plaster works like some of the work you can see here. I mean, it's quite a labor-intensive work, but we are using very good quality of lime. It takes time, but you get a very good result. Okay, some of the quality work that you can see. There is something called Tadelact, which is much more waterproof. This we do for toilets or places where water is a problem. Okay. Now we move to the architecture part of thumb impressions. So as I was speaking about the type, I thought that let's put some of the plans that that we have worked out and re-look at it from the perspective what is changing or what remains constant as a type. And for us, there are some residences which are built. So there are some residences which are still in design stage. There are some residences which are about to begin. But we have put some of the plans. So this is Malay Bhai's work, which is still going on. This is work which is supposed to start, and and these two are the work which is already on ground, and this is already completed. So if you look at, this was the tightest building that we did, and the idea was there is a movement and both sides you create space. Okay, so you centralize the movement so that you get the space, and then you sectionally work. And this side was closed because there was other common property here. This was a pavilion, which is a Yogshala pavilion, which is a separate kind of a type. But if you look at this, from here if you look at it, there are these open spaces between which there are two blocks, then there is again an open court. So an open court like this, again an open court and an open court. So there is always this tendency to find an open court, and one of the purpose of doing it is to allow to get the walls to operate like a picture plane depending on different times of the day. So you get a sense of what time it is when this is completely let free. So one of our idea has always been to look at this constancy. Okay, so if you look at, this is a factory building that we did for masala factory. Again, we have created an in-between open space, and where you can sort of constantly have a relationship. This is where the storage and sorting, etc. happen, and this is where the factory part is, where all the machines are there. Again, a very low budget, but yes, a sort of interesting work to get into it. If you look at this, this is a restaurant that we recently worked out. This is a work which the brief was that it needs to be dismantled in 10-15 years. It's on lease. So everything was on steel or a material which you can recycle or you can return back again as far as possible. So, but again, if you look at it, there is an in-between space, and then there are these relationships. If you look at this, which is a residence in Kota, we are doing. This is the first time where we are working with a situation where at least 3 parts is where the movement happens around the court. Okay, because one of the problem is to resolve a court is a very difficult thing. To bring it and then to resolve it becomes very difficult. So we have still not reached a point where we have got 4 sides worked out. We have got 2 sides worked out. Now we have got 3 sides worked out. We have not reached a level where there are 4 sides. Now, in this case again, we have reached a point where there are this court, and then there is a movement which traverses here, and this is open to sky. And these are the 2 relationships that you build. This is Malaj Bhai's house, he is present. In his case, what happens is there are 2 open spaces which are dispersed outside onto the 2 edges because of the nature of activity that wants. One, in his case, he wants this to be exclusive, at peace, pristine, silent, and on the other hand, he wants this to be public. So that's why if you look at it, it goes like so this is again a closed space, so it almost tucks inside, goes and then hides itself outside, whereas this completely opens up. So one becomes the public, and then there are smaller open spaces which are obviously is worked out. But in his case, this is the first time where we are getting an open land all around. In the rest of the cases, they are all smaller plots, and you have to respond to the situation in which it is. So what is important here to see is the relationship between an inside open space to rest of them and how they are shifting when it becomes smaller to when it starts getting a space from relationship to 2 sides to 3 sides. Okay, and then how are the movements works out to sort of build those relationships. So this is the Yogshala project. As I was discussing earlier, that every time we are doing a project, the program and the structure are almost more simultaneous than the material. And for us, what is very important is the span, because it's the span which has far more freedom than when you are working with enclosures and bearing members. Because when you are working with bearing members, then obviously the plan and the organization starts working. Whereas when it is span, you are far more freer. So let me explain you how it works. Bamboo has got low modulus of elasticity and it has got high tensile strength. Because of low modulus of elasticity, you will hardly find a bamboo structure which is straight. Most of the bamboo structure are curved. To put, now you make it into curve in spite of high tensile strength is because you don't want to deal with low modulus of elasticity. It's very difficult to deal with low modulus of elasticity. So what in this Yogshala we did, apart from the idea that it has to have an expression, there is an arch here, this one, and this one, if you see, is an independent truss which has got a slight cambering. The cambering comes out of the on-site experiment. These are some of the details. I'll explain you further. Okay, so these are all customized details, because one of the area that we are working is we are trying to standardize fastener system in bamboo so that more urban areas it can be used and much more freely. Okay, so there are some of the details that you can see how we are working with saddle details, etc. This is this detail. These are when you are combining two bamboo which are coming at an angle, but you have created a movement because you need some tolerance to work with bamboo. Bamboo is not perfectly straight. So this is what the section would look like. This is what you can see, and this is what you can experience. Now let me explain you here. This arch is a redundancy that has been added to the structure. It is not working right now. It will start working when the truss system starts sagging. So one layer of precaution is by creating a cambering. The second layer is by adding redundancy through the arch. And from the top chord of the trusses, these diagonal members comes and rest on the arch, and that's what you see as the poetics. So it emerges from the logic of the structure. At the same time, it also emerges from the demand that we need to make something like this, and at the same time a program. Okay. Architects are compelled to write. We have been also compelled to write. So there is a logic that we have tried to woven between yoga and this, which I'll not explain right now because I'm trying to explain you the thought which is going on behind it. And it's around 74 feet, around 23 point some meters. One of the largest spanning structure in bamboo in the world. I mean, at least the top 2-3 it should be. And then of course to connect to different, so these are abstract, but if you see these are yoga postures to connect symbolically to people who otherwise would find it difficult to connect with abstract ideas. This is a next level of work, R&D, which we are doing. Now here if you look at, this is a serendipity pavilion which we did this time. If you look at this span, this is a parametric generated form where there is a rigid member here and the sagging is taken care by the woven member which is much more bigger. So the deflection is taken, the stiffness is taken care by how do you weave it and generate another form which then poetically starts working for you. Now there are other things also here. Let me see if I will draw it. I'm surprised. Okay, I think I'll come back. There would be some images of that. This is a project which is work in progress all the time, because it's an NGO campus and they keep on raising money to make it. So every time they raise money, they do little bit of thing. So again, it's a bamboo structure and this is a truss, but the span is less, so we don't have to cross triangulate it. So this is the quality of space that you get. And if you look at the plan of it, see, if you look at it, one of the way in which we work is the plan in this direction has more span and in this direction has less span. This is north and this is south. Now there is a careful consideration, because we are thinking in our mind that how do we manipulate the plan to create a spanning different at the top. Because the moment you increase the span here, your beam depth is going to change. Otherwise, it will be compensated by reinforcement. Okay, so constantly we are trying to say, how do you integrate this, and so that's how it gets integrated. And then you see the expression of it. So in this case, it is integrated through reinforcement and not through the depth of the span. So the depth of the span remains constant here to work with other logics. Okay, I mean again on the end, of course, we have cross braced here because it's a region of seismic zone 3 and it also is a region of high wind velocity. This is our again interest in trying to utilize the tension property of bamboo, because the tension property of bamboo is as good as steel, but the problem with that material is that the lignin which binds the fibers of the bamboo is weaker. So let's say even if you are able to, so before you are able to extract the maximum tensile strength of the bamboo, it will fail in joinery. So you will never be able to gain the maximum potential of it. So this is one of the element. It is made out of the split. This is the vertical member for that. So this is how it is combined, and these are all tension membered which is being pulled. There would be a diagram to show that. Yeah, this one. So you see this is pulled reverse way. When you pull cable like this and like this, it becomes a pure tension structure. And then how do you engineer bamboo? How do you develop its component is other part of it. So you see now the relationship that you can see here, the vertical member, and then the cables that are going, which are made out of splits. That's all the details. So if you look at it, there is also a detail here where there is a bolt and it is touching a line. It's not touching this part. This is another attempt to put bamboo in urban infrastructure project. This is a workshop which we did for Triple ID, and it was inaugurated by Hyderabad government during that time. And if you look at the details, this detail, if you start looking at it, I would have images. So this saddle is worked out based on diameter of the bamboo. So there, like you have got washer of 12 number, 14 number, etc. You can have saddle of these numbers, and based on what bamboo you select, you can use it, bolt it, and you can standardize it. So no customized joint is required to make this bus stop. Though we had also given a proposal for the council, but it didn't work, I think. This is a structure where we failed. It's a 13-meter post-tensioning structure in bamboo, which we post-tensioned it using steel. What was happening is we were not able to balance the CG, and so it toppled towards this side with a deflection of around 20 mm. And if you look at it, it is pulled by cables, and they are all highly engineered. If you look at all these details, all are customized. We customized all the details, worked out, but that was very unfortunate that we could not work out, and the client didn't have that much patience to take it, because sometimes if you take a leap of faith, there are failures that will happen, and unfortunately we failed in this. This is another roof which we are doing with Hunarshala. This is Hunarshala's office for which we did an R&D. I'll explain you, and then there are a few images. This is a rafter. The rafter will bend like this. If you leave it, it will sag like that. Now there is an independent arch which comes here. You can see they are not touching. And then there is this vertical member which is sliding. The vertical member is sliding between the arch. It is connected to the top rafter, but it is not connected to the arch. When it goes here at the bottom, from here there is a tension member which goes and connects to the arch. So what happens is that when there is a sagging, again redundancy built into structure for future failure. Then once it starts sagging, what happens is that the tension starts working, and then the compression member eventually starts working. So it's an indirect load path that sort of works here. And so you get a space like this, and you get a space like this. The roof is inclined. We are still to document it. And these are some of the details. Again, all details customized by us. All the details. See, the thing is, because bamboo diameter keeps changing, again we have worked out a width in a way that it can change whatever. It doesn't matter because of the nature of relationship that we have built between the curve and the square form. This is which we did with workshopping for Raw Collaborative. It's an exhibition stall that we had worked out. This is the one which I was talking about. That this is an inclined member, and this whole form which you see round is there to not allow it to sag. And the stiffness is created by this form, and it's a parametrically generated form. So wherever the stress line is there, that's the curve that we have taken here. Now if you look at this part, this is important part to understand. Just give me 1 minute, I'll go close by to explain you this. You see that this, if you look at it, is a beam. This is a beam. The bottom member, the top member, and this combines, and all of this is a beam. Now, what happens is there is a material that we have removed from the vertical member. Now, the moment you remove material, it becomes weak. What now we have done is, we have taken rods from here, connected it to the tension member, which is a cable, and connected it back. So there is a pull force from the down to take the load onto it. So it both works as an enclosure as well as a force diagram. So if you see this, you can see that this is the path of it. There are more details that I'll show you. Okay. This is the bottom portion from where this rod comes in. This is the material that has been removed, and this is how the connection happens before it is taken to the end and then anchored to the ground. And these are some of the details that again we have customized it. Some of the elements you can see. This is another detail, if you can see. We have removed material to make bamboo weak, to then see what would be the potential that it can take. So it can take enough weight. So we are also trying to constantly learn and think, because it was installation, people were sitting, but it was short term, so we could take more risks. And so this is what the detail would be. A small residence that we did, very tight residence. So as I was saying while explaining you the type, is that this is the central portion where all movement happens, and then we start connecting it in various ways, which you can see sectionally. And then you see that we have taken light as much as wherever we can take, and there are places where we could not manage because there are different interests of people who are also living in the house. So, but our idea was to take it till the living room. And then of course again you get whatever element you get in steel, etc., you celebrate. And in this case what we want to do, again an asymmetric force diagram, and then there are two angle section which is working here, and these are some of the spaces. I think the image has been compressed, but this is a factory building, very low budget, but we just completed it. It's a masala factory. No, you can see this is a masala factory. This part is where the machines are, which is this part. This part is where all storage and admins are. And in between is where the coat is, where you can spill and sort of work out. Again here what we did was, we have used a flitch section, but in what we have done, instead of we are curving the timber, we are curving the steel. So the force diagram, what we are doing is, here you look at the steel is curved and then it is stiffened. And then the timber comes on both sides, and we have not carved the timber. And then you can see some of the spaces. Of course there are bolts. Whatever we can manage, we sort of try to do it. You can see the detail of the other roof, again stiffened it. It's just completed a restaurant in Surat, the Flying Roof restaurant. So what we have done is, we have profiled the section with a force diagram. We have used perforated sheet for that. So you see that this is the restaurant portion, and this is the portion of, this is the kitchen portion, and then you can spill to the other side. This is the way it connects. And these are perforated sheet which is stiffened. This from the other side. This we are thinking day and night, because from the it's at the urban edge. So we are thinking about how do you allow maximum flow of at least the view into this, because this is transparent. In the night it sort of lights and it shines. And this is its public interface, and this is what the section looks like. So this is around, I think, 5 mm, 8 mm. 8 mm. Yeah, thank you. I'm done.